And it's time to talk with Harold Hillman, who joins us every week about this time, executive coach, sigmoidcurve.com, to talk about some things that are happening in leadership. Harold, a very good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Mel.
Every week I hope that maybe one day I'll see you soon in the studio, and every week I'm like, nope, another week
I know,
where it's not going to happen.
And here we are. We're just like 6 blocks away from each other right now, but so I loved coming into the studio. I miss being able to do that.
I could practically go to the window and wave to you, but they're not happening for another few weeks at the very least. So let's talk about leadership trends. What are some of the trends that we see happening in New Zealand and globally, and how companies are developing their leaders as we sort of navigate through this absolute mess of a pandemic?
That's right, Mel. I've been reading some very interesting articles over the past couple of weeks to get a feel for how companies are now developing their leaders, particularly in light of navigating through this pandemic over the past 21 months. I wanted to compare what others are seeing globally with my own experience and observations of how companies, public and private sector, have shifted the lens on leadership development here in New Zealand. And through that research, I came across 4 trends which really resonated with my own observations of how we've had to adapt here. The top one is that leaders have to develop an agile change mindset. This idea that there's always a paradox. Back in the 1990s, the leadership guru and famous author by the name of Charles Handy wrote a book called The Age of Paradox. And in that book, Handy talked about the fact that even though we realize that we have to change in order to grow, there tends to be this human inclination towards preferring stability. Hence the paradox there. And we cannot let things sit stable anymore in businesses. Back when he wrote that book, you had the luxury of about 7 years if you were putting in a new strategy or process or system to help improve the business. You could rest on that for about 7 years, whereas now in 2021, that cycle has compressed almost threefold to the point where you really have to shake things up. And that means developing very agile leaders who don't get locked into a certain mindset or a way of being. And in fact, some companies now invest in what's called agile leadership, which is moving people around on an annual basis into different roles and into where their talents may be required so that they don't lock into the sense of complacency.
That's really interesting. So what other mindset, or what else is changing? What are the trends that companies are looking at?
Another one is, as you are well aware, Mel, the many businesses, companies are investing in employee well-being. That is, as we've talked about before, with significant spikes in anxiety and depression and just mental health issues around everyone. Everyone that we know has been impacted by this. And so companies now, well-being is no longer lip service, it is for real. And it basically, boils down to employers being able to help people work more flexibly, better work-life integration, if you will, in terms of that flexibility. Investing more in employee benefits around the remote workforce, as well as health benefits for people to just make sure that they are in a good space, in an optimal space there. And then following on from that, another trend is, and we know this well now, as we all, here in Auckland at least, sit in level 3, working from anywhere. That is real now. I used to call it the genie in the bottle, that every company or organization had a work flex policy, but it's set on the shelf over there, and very few people ask to work flexibly because most of their leadership teams were not working flexibly. People keep their eye on the executive team and the organization and infer what's reasonable. Now the genie is out of the bottle, and that genie is called workplace flexibility. You're not going to get the genie back in the bottle. The reality is, and the benefits, Mel, just in terms of lower business expenses, you can hire people who don't necessarily live in the same city or country for that matter. And then improve employee engagement and retention, not to mention a reduction in that carbon footprint.
Well, that's true. And also, as you say, it's happened now. And for many years, I guess it was frowned upon because it was always there but never used. But now, well, everyone's had to go flexible, haven't they? So there's no excuse not to do it.
It is yes, absolutely. It really reflects the importance around what I call the leadership shadow, and particularly for senior leaders in an organization, members of an executive team who lead the organization. You may say one thing, but people are keeping their eyes on whether or not you actually are congruent. You're doing what you say. So we used to say, hey, we value workplace flex, but no one at the top of the organization typically was using that. Now that we all have had to do it, it's really apparent now that people can work more efficiently and more effectively remotely, and so it is here to stay. That is certainly what the global trends are tracking.
And what's the final trend that you want to address for us, Harold?
Well, a topic that resonates close to my own heart, which is empathetic leadership, which we have had to really get our heads around over the last 21 months or so, where leaders in businesses have had to make themselves more present, to focus more, stay on calls longer with an individual who may be working through something. Pre-COVID, we were all, the world, especially in open space work environments, Ms. Mel, there's so many distractions, disruptions, those types of things, where, at best, we would have a 2-minute conversation with the person before we move on to the next person. Empathetic leadership means that leaders are spending a bit more time in that space of understanding how difficult it is. Not just understanding it, but actually walking in their people who work for them, walking in their shoes. It's become real. And the idea that we are whole people. Our lives are integrated around our life at home and our life at work, and that we are whole people, and that when we come into that work context, it is important every now and then to just slow down and take a minute or two to just really have a conversation with a person who may be pushing through something that is tough. It doesn't require any leader to be a psychotherapist, not by any stretch of the imagination am I suggesting that. But it does make a difference when you make space just to listen to another person who may just need to ventilate, get something off their chest, that type of thing.
Absolutely. Harold Hillman, always a pleasure to chat with you. If you want more from Harold, sigmoidcurve.com. You can find his latest book in good bookstores. Empathy is what it's called. And we will talk to you again next week. Shows that workplace people should be a little bit more empathetic at times too. That's a trend for leadership.